Okay, let's do some hot takes. For this week, we've each picked or made two kind of hot takes that we're going to run through and have a little debate or discussion around these said hot takes.
I'm gonna flame you guys.
Yeah, who wants to start? Either of you.
Max,
Tom,
you go. You
no,
go.
you start.
Aw, he's shucks. All right, so you guys told me to come up with a hot take, so I was doing a little research. My original inkling was Carabao Cup has to go. What is that? Like an extra cup? But then I started doing a little reading about the history of the English league and how it's the English Football League and the FA. FA is the FA Cup. English Football League is the governing body of the Championship in the League One and League Two, and it used to be the governing body of the English Top League until in the 90s the Premier League was founded. And the Premier League was founded because the top clubs in the Premier League wanted more broadcasting rights. Essentially, each year they were only getting like 50% of the broadcasting rights of all four leagues. And they were like, we're bringing in pretty much all the viewers. We want a larger contract. And negotiations basically took place over and over again in the 90s, like a decade of negotiations. And how the clubs broke away is they went to the FA and said, we want to join you as the Premier League. And that gave them some credibility. They're with a organized organization, so it's the FA Premier League. There was still the regulation or relegation and promotion between the lower leagues, even though it's technically a different committee, the EFL. But through that deal, they like massively increased their revenues, and it sort of like transformed the league into this commercial league that we know today. My hot take is a similar event is going to happen in the next 10 years where essentially the Super League is going to happen because of the amount of money on the table. Like Deloitte and I forgot who else was in on the investment for the Super League, but it was like these clubs were going to get $300 million a
JP
year.
Morgan, actually.
Yeah, JP Morgan. They were going to get like $300 million to join this league. The jump in funds is similar to the amount of jump that happened in the 90s.
Yeah.
You can see that in the transfer, the like highest transfer in like the 90s before the Premier League was like 3 million, and within 10 years it was like 30-40 million.
Yeah.
Where Chelsea was getting Shevchenko for like 40 million. And that was possible because these clubs were getting richer and richer. And my hot take is Super League's going to happen. It's not going to happen like they planned it, where it was like a locked set league. I think they have to allow the other teams the potential to make it to that league to share some of that revenue, or else essentially their domestic leagues will just like kick them out. And I guess my idea of what it would look like would be the Champions League would be like a competition like the Carabao Cup, where it's like additional to a Super League, and the top four English clubs get to make it, but then teams like Chelsea, Man U are not in the Premier League anymore.
Well, so before you go...
Right. I would get to the logistics, but I think that's going to happen where there's a joint European league, and those teams will not be in their domestic leagues anymore.
So I feel like that's already kind of happened with the new Champions League format.
Right.
With the 2024 like overhaul, with they're adding they're getting rid of the group stage. They're adding four or five or six more teams. They're adding 4 games to the calendar. So what it is, it's just, I think right now it's 34 teams or 32 teams.
Yeah, I don't know.
8 groups of 4, 32 teams. It's going to become 36. And they're just going to play, it's all like one league, and every team plays 10 games, just randomly selected throughout the league.
Right.
Which I feel like is
I guess that is like what
kind of what that is. And because I mean, when you get in the Champions League, you get a lot of money. This is more like a league style. Each team is playing 4 more games more teams have the chance to get in here, which is just more revenue all around. So I guess I agree with you, and I think this is kind of a rendition of that, or how what you're saying could play out, and is playing out, because right now they're just getting more games on the calendar of a higher level of teams throughout Europe, and also gives smaller teams more of a chance to get in there. But there's also the contingency that of the 4 additional spots, 2 of those spots are given to 2 teams that didn't qualify for the Champions League but have the highest UEFA coefficient. So basically, if United doesn't make it, they're getting in. It's a safety net, so these big teams can get in and still bring the money in.
Right.
So I feel like that's kind of what that is, honestly, or how it can play out, because that's still, you still have to qualify for it. You can still not be in it next year, which kind of keeps the, openness of the sport in there. But also, it's more of like a league style, and there'll be more games and more emphasis on it.
Yes, I agree that there's going to be more games, but I think the goal of sort of, instead of what it's going to be like 36 teams, I feel like these bigger clubs are going to go for a smaller league where they can play each other confirmed like twice a year. I think the new format of the Champions League provides a few more games, like the one we saw today, Inter versus Liverpool, the one we saw yesterday of Real versus PSG. I think their goal is to fill up the calendar with games like that, because that adheres to a global audience, and that's what's going to bring in the huge money compared to the pretty big money that Europe already brings in.
I agree, but I think the argument against that is those special games won't be special anymore when they're being played every weekend, right? Because the problem with the Super League was you're going to have Bayern versus PSG or Real Madrid versus Chelsea. Like, if it happens every weekend, it's not special. And that's the same argument with the World Cup happening more often, is like, no, the reason why we love it is because it's so rare. It only happens every 4 years. And I think if you have something all the time, it loses like the value of it. Like, it's special because we only get these games like once in a blue moon and things like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's special for us. I don't think like the people making the money from it really care about it as much. They see more games as more revenue, and that's why every year there are more games on the calendar for these players. And I think it would take a very severe drop off of viewership of those games for that actually to dissuade them from putting more games on the calendar. So I don't know. I definitely could see that happening. And maybe, I think this Champions League overhaul is kind of the first step towards that, or like a kind of an in-between. And so maybe 4 years later they go another step further.
Right. I think it's going to be a process of
but I feel like that's likely, and that's kind of the rules and stuff, or the leagues are kind of always changing, and so it's likely that something at least similar to that or will happen at some point.
It's not as stagnant as we believe, because we're like, since we've been watching, Super League is the biggest proposed change we've ever seen. But it happens a lot. The Premier League is a big change. And I guess my reasoning for it is, and it's kind of the reason why Real Madrid started the Super League. It's like, take Bayern for instance. Bayern is on a global audience only in the Champions League, versus Chelsea plays Liverpool and Man City. Those are the big games of the weekend. So the other big teams not in the Premier League, because the Premier League is becoming pretty huge, are seeing a lot of this broadcast revenue going to England, and they can't really compete with the teams in their own leagues. And that's why I think those teams are going to see, not those teams, but the people profiting from those teams are basically going to be like, this Bayern is going to come up and say Bundesliga is not really worth it to play anymore if we can join a Super League where we play. It will take away from the game, obviously, but playing Chelsea, Liverpool, every week everyone would watch those games.
Yeah. The only thing with that is like that's the exact opposite of what Bayern said was like we want to play in the Bundesliga and they wanna stay in their league, and obviously from a business aspect, yes, more games, like more money, but I think it's just like already with the Champions League, the biggest clubs are getting bigger, and that's creating a huge gap between all the other teams, and things like that are only going to make the gap bigger. And so it's going to get impossible for some of these clubs to even compete with the big clubs.
That's the point. I feel like is that because that gap is growing is the reason these teams even can think of stepping away, because they're like, we are way too good for our league. We're not making any money, or like we're not making the amount of money we could be if we're staying in this league because we're too good. The gap is too big for us to even be here. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the way it would work. Yeah. And I think that's the way, Perez from Madrid is kind of seeing it play out.
Yeah, I think it's coming in a time where the sport is, especially in America, becoming a lot more popular. And just like that global audience can't wrap their head around 80 teams in each of or like 100 teams in each of the top 5 leagues. So I think, from a business perspective, they see the best way is to consolidate the clubs that people know and just like create a league like that. Which would suck. It would suck kind of but it's also like, I don't know, if it happens, it happens. And I guess this is kind of like an American perspective, because if I was born in England as a Chelsea fan like 30 years ago, I wouldn't want them to leave the Premier League. It would be the end of an era versus us who aren't ingrained in that kind of just like tradition, sees it as something that happens, and we get crazy amount of games. I feel like people that are new to the sport won't have a problem with it. I think that's the leverage the business people have.
Yeah, we're all Americans, like we all watch like American sports, and I think the biggest difference is there's a natural like up and down, like American teams, basketball, football, whatever. There are certain years where they're good and there are certain years they're bad, and that's because of like the draft and like everything. Like you don't really have that in soccer because the biggest clubs they're always going to be big. They can just buy whoever. And I don't really know how you like kind of go about that. Like, I guess for like NFL teams, they're big teams, but like they have bad years. They have salary caps to like kind of level the playing field, like things like that. And like in soccer, you have like financial fair play, but how much does that do? I feel like,
Yeah, I don't know.
It's tough.
Yeah, I feel like, not much else to say. It's just, I think it's bound to happen.
It's probably inevitable.
It's just going to be something that happens. I think it's, but like Premier League happened, and then
I think the thing will be is like the reason the Super League didn't work is because they weren't transparent at all, and they just dropped it and said this is happening. No one else has a say. But the Champions League, it's much more gradual. They said, okay, in 4 years, this small step is going to happen. And the fans were much more receptive to that. The public was much more receptive to that. And that's likely their pathway to success, to get something more like the Super League. Because they can't just say, okay, this is happening, surprise, because that obviously didn't work. They already tried that and it didn't work. Yeah. So I feel like the more, I guess, at this point, proven process is to kind of do it more gradually and rely on the Champions League until the Champions League is the league more.
It's gonna be a slow process, and it has to have a potential for the other clubs to break into it. That was the other point where the Super League was a lot
exclusive.
Exclusive. Which is
all right.
Let's move on.
Yeah.